Last video, we talked about movies without scripts. This led to us discussing documentaries of all shapes and sizes. Unconventional filmmaking ideas can free you from the constraints of more conventional filmmaking. It can be something that enables you to make a film that is not just innovative, but existent, without costing you so much. These films aren't commercially viable, so they'll be made with no investments nor expectations of return. Money is a factor that worries a lot of filmmakers. It can pretty much dictate what films get to be made, and influences the decisions made on set. So I wanted to talk about some films that can make us think about how one can make a good movie without any proper studio funding. But that's still a big list, and if you look around the internet for low-budget films, there would be videos and articles that feature stuff like Whiplash, Reservoir Dogs, and Little Miss Sunshine. And, not so surprisingly, they're literally made for millions of dollars. Now these remain to be just huge budgets, I think, and I still can't imagine having that much money to spend on just making a movie. I'm sure a lot of people feel that way too. It was really difficult to research for this segment because anytime I'd look up no-budget films, results instead would give me films worth tens of thousands of dollars. Some of these quote-unquote no-budget films have famous examples like Clerks, Pi, and The Blair Witch Project. And as you can see here, they're pretty far from having no budget. Tens of thousands of dollars is still a lot of money to be used. I can't believe these are considered the charitable standard for movies that don't cost you anything to make. I think a fun movie to start us off with this segment is Les Blancs' Werner Herzog Eats His Shoe from 1980. It's a short documentary that likely didn't take a lot to make since it's just footage of Werner Herzog talking, walking, cooking, and then, yes, eating his shoe. But in the middle of all that, you get the sense that this moment is huge for independent filmmaking. So I'd like to bring it up now. Okay, so why would Herzog do this? It's simple, really. He lost a bet. The now successful director Errol Morris was complaining to Herzog about how he would love to make a film, but he could never find a way to finish it. No one would fund it, and he couldn't find a way to get the money. In a funny way of trying to motivate Morris, Herzog told him that if he finished his film, he would eat his shoe. Morris made Gates of Heaven. It was a success. Les Blanc made this film, and it's one of the best films I could recommend to independent artists. Werner Herzog has always been this champion of independent filmmaking. He grew up poor and had to steal a camera just so he could start making films at all. He recommends doing this for all aspiring filmmakers. He ran a rogue film school that outwardly states it will not teach you anything technical related to filmmaking. Instead, he prioritized teaching how to pick locks and how to forge permits. He embodied not letting anything get in the way of you and your dreams with how he would make his own films. The film here starts with Herzog ranting about waging a holy war against banal television programming and commercial filmmaking. That's exactly what creating and championing no-budget cinema would accomplish. So I'd like to make it more realistic than those quote-unquote no-budget films I mentioned earlier, worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Let's try lowering the bar even further to films that can cost as little as possible while still maintaining high artistic value. For most of these, I'm just speculating about the budget and basing it off of the product if there's no data on it. Often, these films just feel like they were made with no budget. We can discuss good films of this kind by following that idea that artists do what they want and can indulge in that when nothing is stopping them. So if you find value in watching something that is a person's pure artistic expression, unconcerned with the box office or investors, then I'm sure a lot of these following films would appeal to you. Arguably the most personal form of movie is the film diary. This kind of filmmaking should be more accepted than it is. It's pretty self-explanatory. A diary made through film. I think a lot of us have done a version of this. The aesthetics of home video footage does have an effect towards us because of the memories that we tie that to. Low quality footage from handheld cameras can feel grounded. It's something that we associate with real life. News and documentaries probably have something to do with that, but it's in home videos that we really attach ourselves to, despite it being filmed this way. Thus, shooting films like this can make it feel more personal and intimate, which then benefits plenty of stories that we like to share. All of the styles and technologies associated with film diaries are pretty cheap and accessible. If you're watching this video, you can probably start creating film diaries. I guess the more important question is if you can make a good film through the diary form. Well, I'd like to preface my answer by reminding how subjective films are, and something as personal as a diary makes it much more reliant on one's own personal preference. But one of the more universally beloved examples of this would be As I Was Moving Ahead, Occasionally I Saw Brief Glimpses of Beauty by Jonas Mekas. It was completed in the year 2000, but it was built from personal video footage that was shot in a span of 3 decades. It is a compiled work of Jonas Mekas' life. He was able to show how much these moments really mattered to him. And it comes out as something that's been able to really move a lot of people. He was able to touch on a lot of ideas and emotions in these super intimate events that are somehow always beautiful to us. It's nice to start off with this one because it does have a lot of ambition, which almost makes it weird to call it a diary. It has epic proportions, running for almost 5 hours long. And it does a lot of grand things like recounting an entire human life and finding definitions of beauty. But yeah, it is just a bunch of home movies stitched together. Let's move on to Chris Marker, who made the greatest travelogue ever with Sans Soleil. It's comprised of footage taken at different points of Marker's journey to different continents, observing humanity. There's some very poetic musings throughout the film about time, place, and memory. It's more a film essay than straightforward documentary. It is formless, but you can feel a lot of care in how it is tied together. It's deeply profound, but comes in a form that you can sleep next to. What I like about this film, for this episode specifically, is that it is beautifully written. While most of the other films in this episode of the series may also fit the last one, these film diary type projects are usually done off the fly, leaning more on an artist's skill to improvise and observe rather than write. It's a good lesson that great writing, such as what you can find in this movie, can carry a film that could be lacking in other resources. My favorite artist that does this kind of grounded approach is Kidlat Tahimik. His popular stuff blends narrative and documentary aspects together in DIY fashion, but he does also do a lot of straight-up diary work. Bakit Dilaw ang Gitna ng Bahaghari is another large compilation of film diary entries that span more than a decade. It has its fair share of home video footage, but it also chronicles some of the most consequential events in Philippine history. Throughout all of this, it really just gets across what Kidlat Tahimik's whole personality is. It doesn't list every important moment of his life, or even his daily routines. He just talks about what's going on, with wonderful commentary. I find his outlook towards the influence of imperialism and westernization really compelling, especially when he talks about creating art independently and personally. He really is the embodiment of this no-budget diary mode of filmmaking. The footage here piles up to over 3 hours long, but he's also made shorter diary films about just mini adventures like planting and disaster relief that he does with his kids. And it's all really beautiful stuff. He uses film as a time capsule sometimes too. So should we even regard these as films? Because that kind of means we're all filmmakers then. Who here hasn't taken out their phone and just started recording themselves chilling at their friend's house, or took a quick video of their pets? Millions of these videos are being made every single day. Vlogs have become a huge industry here on YouTube. It's more normal than ever to just record every single thing you do. Well, This Is Not a Film is a film by Jafar Panahi, which does exactly these things, but he does them with higher stakes than everyone else who does. The reason this film is titled this way is likely a kind of loophole, because making a film would land filmmaker Jafar Panahi in prison for 20 years. He is in house arrest for thinking about making a movie which the state government would not like. So they imprisoned him and then banned him from making a movie for 20 years. Every single shot here taken from his phone is an act of defiance against that oppressive government. This film also expands how we think movies can be made through what occurs within it. It lets us have a peek into Panahi's creative process, going through certain hurdles. We listen to his musings on the creation of his previous work, as well as the future possibilities for filmmaking. The discourse of the film is being enacted through the film in real time. It's a very special piece that absolutely transcends all of its limitations. This just shows what I like about all of this film diary type stuff. It's wrong to assume that artists make these films because they're too lazy or incompetent. It hits a target that majority of films can't. I think we all have a need to hear other human beings opening up and expressing themselves without influence from studios, markets, and censors. Marginalized voices must be heard. But typically, these voices only have ways of relaying themselves outside of the industry and through alternative means. Even messages that can be interpreted as subversive or alternative becomes in service of capital in one way or another if it is put into the capitalist system, which sells products for consumption. Transgressive cinema just can't be that product. So I think it's good for us to put in the work in seeing these films with alternative modes of production, and we must come at them after removing the standards that have been hammered into our heads by this industry and market. Think about what actually makes a film good or bad. Think about if calling something cheap looking is really the right criticism you want to make. Think about who you refer to as real filmmakers, as opposed to those not real filmmakers. Are you assessing a film's function under capitalism, or trying to grasp at its inherent value? These alternative type of films can give us something new. The films in this episode feel very human, and open up new kinds of connections that I can make with a movie. I like the work of Eli Hayes very much. They are so expressive and intimate, even when they're not strictly in the form of a film diary. My favorite of his is Florida Melancholy, which is actually a landscape film, but it also just feels so deeply human and personal. The footage could be seen as random, but it's never trivial. They were shot at some of the darkest moments of his life, and capturing these shots were his personal way of getting through that. You can absolutely stray away from a film diary and still make a cheap movie. We can go back to Maya Deren, who famously stated, "I make pictures for what Hollywood spends on lipstick." That's not so hard to imagine when you see her works, shot in her apartment or in nature, starring herself and her partner. None of that prevents these films from being ethereal works of art and masterful studies in movement. Meshes of the Afternoon remains as the best one to dive into, but for the sake of this video topic, maybe check out her cute cat video. Another filmmaker capable of conjuring up otherworldly scenes from their apartment is Takashi Ito. I mean, look at this stuff. If you don't mind flashing images, that is. It's haunting, it's mysterious, but it's also creative and fun. There's so much ingenuity that comes into his films. This is just guerrilla filmmaking in the types of places we likely have access to. He finds a way to turn these scenery into something exciting and unique through inventive lighting and editing techniques, along with other flourishes that probably don't take so much out of his pockets. Thunder is, in my opinion, the best exhibition of Ito's artistic ceiling, but you can just get lost in his sea of work. They're all pretty great while avoiding all of the pitfalls from working with no budget. I feel that I get so much of what he's trying to convey because it doesn't need an actor's face to say it, right? Having no money means not being able to hire people to make a movie with you. Maybe it could help you lock in on some other specific aspects of your film. Making a movie without a budget means you don't have to be so concerned about elaborate sets, visual effects, or equipment. A lot of those landscape films I mentioned execute this limitation really well, because you don't need actors when your subject is a landscape. You don't need a lighting crew or a production team to design that either. Sometimes the trick is to set your target a little closer. A filmmaker can set the scope of their project to just observe a single object, or have their subject even be a unique formal approach. A lot of concepts end up as great films just by doing this. I like those films that focus on a very specific thing. To me, pouring in hard work doesn't equate to a good film necessarily. In fact, I would actually much rather live in a world where I experience good art while artists aren't tired and stressed from making it. I want filmmaking to be fun. It doesn't have to be a life-changing 2 hours that spans 3 decades of a human life and defies authoritarian governments. It can be a decent 2 minutes that just makes you smile or helps you remember how cool water looks. It's supposed to be easy to appreciate those movies that give you some level of joy while requiring so little of your time and effort in viewing. Remember La Region Central? Well, I couldn't stop thinking about how fun it feels, not just to watch it, but to imagine it being made. Though it did need thousands of dollars for the equipment on its own, I think. But the sentiment lives on in Snow's other work that I mentioned before in the last episode. The one I'd highlight for this current topic would be Solar Breath, which is just his curtains in the wind, but ends up as another personal favorite of mine. Another big name in structural cinema is Hollis Frampton, a friend of Michael Snow. My favorite film of his is actually narrated by Snow. This is Hapax Legomena 1, or more commonly referred to as Nostalgia in parentheses. This film also has a fairly simple idea behind it. In the movie, Snow narrates from the perspective of Hollis Frampton, talking about the photographs that he had taken, as those photographs themselves turn into ashes via hot plate. But the sound is not in sync. What is being narrated is a story of the upcoming photograph, not yet shown. So the disconnect between audio and video likewise creates a rift in our experience of time, making us recount the past desperately before it fades away, while also having to grasp what's presently being given in order to understand the future. The concept is kinda nuts despite it not likely requiring any budgeting, though there is a great sense of value in its production. Frampton likely had all of these resources before deciding to make the movie. These are photos taken from way back. But that's also why there's a profound sense of loss when you see it being put to flames. These are emotions I have never felt from any million-dollar city destruction sequence. It's always neat to find an example of doing more with less. Though Frampton's done even less. He's decided to observe a lemon for 8 minutes. No profound emotions there for me personally, but like I said, that's not really a requirement for a film in order for it to be great. You could just want to see how light behaves on your favorite fruit. I mean, this is another thing that paintings get away with more often than films, right? Focusing on the shading over fruit has been a staple of fine arts history and practice, and it doesn't really get any criticism for not doing enough as a piece. But Frampton's lemon is nothing compared to what Andy Warhol decided to do with Empire. Now this movie is a single still shot of the Empire State Building. I guess they didn't think its grandeur could fit in a mere 8 minutes, so the whole thing spans for 8.5 hours. It was shot by our good friend from earlier, Jonas Mikas, who recounts a screening of the film wherein the audience actually allowed themselves to be completely immersed into the mundane experience. even later having simultaneous audience reactions saying, "Whoa," to just some lights turning on. Plenty of people still left the screening, of course. A bunch were pissed off too. Now, if this was a photograph on an exhibit wall, people would enjoy it. This'll be for a couple seconds, or maybe even some minutes before they'd likewise just leave as well. It makes me think about how film as a medium allows you to have a louder voice to dictate, "Hey, this is how long you have to pay attention to my work. We're not done here. You still have to look." Empire could be seen as an experiment to see how far that voice could go. So we're now getting into territory where movies are so minimal that they barely have that one thing that is associated with movies: movement. How different can this art form be from photography? In the next video, we'll be talking about movies without moving. For the rest of the series, we will be coming back to more and more examples of no-budget films that I left out on this video because I thought they just fit better in one of the future videos. So, see you all there.